On a Tuesday afternoon in late March, a 2016 Toyota Camry pulled into my bay with a rough idle that the owner described as a shudder at every red light. He had already been to two shops. The first told him it was probably the fuel injectors. The second said it was the spark plugs and coils. Between the two estimates, he was looking at nearly $900 in parts and labor. He handed me both printouts like a man who had already accepted his fate. I asked him one question before I touched anything. I asked how long ago he had changed the PCV valve. He stared at me. I told him we found the problem. Today, I am exposing a $12 part that Toyota, Honda, and dozens of other manufacturers quietly rely on to keep your engine alive, and why mechanics almost never mention it until your repair bill is already past the point of no return. This is not a conspiracy. It is something far more frustrating. It is a misunderstanding so common that even experienced technicians overlook it because the part is so inexpensive that nobody thinks it could be responsible for symptoms this severe. I have been working on vehicles for over 20 years, and I want to tell you something that most people in this industry will not say out loud. The cheapest parts on your engine are often the most important ones. Not the most complex, not the most expensive, but the most critical to how everything else behaves. When they fail quietly, every other system in the engine starts behaving like it is broken, even when it is not. That is the trap. That is where the money gets spent. The PCV valve, which stands for Positive Crankcase Ventilation Valve, is a small plastic or metal component, often no larger than your thumb, tucked somewhere on the valve cover or intake manifold depending on your engine design. On most Toyotas, it costs between $8 and $15 at any auto parts store. It takes roughly 5 minutes to replace with no special tools. It is responsible for managing one of the most underappreciated processes in your entire engine, crankcase pressure. When it fails, and it will fail eventually, it does not announce itself with a dramatic warning light or an obvious noise. It whispers. While it whispers, your engine slowly starts behaving in ways that look exactly like far more expensive problems. Here is what most drivers do not understand about how engines actually breathe. Combustion is not a clean process. Every time your engine fires, a small amount of combustion gases slip past the piston rings and enter the crankcase, the sealed lower section of the engine where the crankshaft and oil live. These gases are a mixture of partially burned fuel, moisture, and corrosive compounds. If they were allowed to sit and accumulate, they would degrade the oil rapidly, corrode internal components, and build pressure that could blow out seals. Engines figured this problem out decades ago, and the solution was the PCV system. Instead of venting those gases to the atmosphere, which was the old method, and which is why cars made before the 1960s left oil stains everywhere, the PCV system routes those gases back into the intake manifold. They get burned off during combustion. The crankcase stays clean. The oil stays protected. The pressure stays controlled. It is an elegant solution, and the valve at the center of it all is a $12 piece of hardware that your engine depends on every single second it is running. When the PCV valve sticks, clogs, or fails, pressure management breaks down. Depending on whether it sticks open or closed, the consequences are different but equally damaging to your wallet if you take the car to someone who does not check it first. A stuck closed PCV valve creates excessive crankcase pressure. That pressure has to go somewhere, and it finds the path of least resistance, your oil seals and gaskets. Suddenly you have an oil leak that looks like a failed rear main seal, a leaking valve cover gasket, or a weeping front crankshaft seal. Shops see the leak and go straight to gasket replacement. Labor alone on a rear main seal can run $400 to $800 on many Toyotas. The gasket itself might be $20. But if the PCV valve is causing the pressure that blew the seal, replacing the seal without replacing the valve is a temporary fix at best. The leak comes back and you pay again. A stuck open PCV valve creates a vacuum leak. Air gets pulled into the intake that was never metered by the mass airflow sensor. The engine control unit has no idea this air exists. It cannot account for it. Fuel trims go haywire. The engine runs lean. The engine control unit compensates by dumping in more fuel, then overcorrects, then compensates again. Idle becomes erratic. You get that rough shudder at low engine speeds. Cold starts feel unstable. Fuel economy drops. In severe cases, the engine misfires enough that it feels like a cylinder is dead. Mechanics hook up a scan tool, see lean codes or misfire codes, and the conversation immediately turns to injectors, oxygen sensors, mass airflow sensors, or spark plugs. Meanwhile, the actual cause is sitting right there on top of the engine, clogged with oil sludge, for $12. There is another failure mode that almost nobody talks about, and this one is particularly common in Toyotas with higher mileage. When the PCV valve fails slowly, the blow-by gases that are supposed to be routed cleanly back into the intake instead carry oil vapor in excessive amounts. That oil vapor coats the intake manifold, the throttle body, and the intake valves with a sticky brown residue. Over time, this residue hardens into carbon deposits. Throttle response dulls. Idle air control becomes inconsistent. On gasoline direct injection engines, which have no fuel wash to clean the intake valves, this buildup accelerates dramatically. A walnut blasting service to clean gasoline direct injection intake valves can cost $400 to $600, and if the underlying PCV failure is not corrected, the deposits come back within months. I have personally seen Toyota 2.5-liter 4-cylinder engines, the ones in the Camry and RAV4, come in for carbon cleaning and return 6 months later with the same complaint. Every time, the PCV valve had never been inspected. The shop treated the symptom and ignored the cause. The customer paid twice, sometimes 3 times, before someone finally looked at the source. Now here is where it gets more frustrating. Toyota service intervals do not always include PCV valve inspection. It is not on the standard maintenance reminder. It does not show up in the oil change checklist at most quick lube shops. It does not get checked during a basic tune-up. The only time most people hear about it is when their car is already showing symptoms severe enough to be misdiagnosed as something worse. This is not a design flaw. Toyota actually builds excellent PCV systems. The flaw is in how maintenance culture has evolved around parts that do not cost enough to seem important. Think about the economics of a repair shop for a moment. A mechanic spends the same labor time diagnosing a rough idle, whether the fix is a $12 PCV valve or a $400 MAF sensor. The parts margin on a $12 component is negligible. The labor charge for a 5-minute replacement is almost embarrassingly small. It is not profitable to lead with the cheapest answer. This is not malice. It is the structure of how automotive repair generates revenue. Diagnosis, in the traditional model, trends toward replaceable parts with meaningful margins. A $12 valve does not fit that model, even when it is the correct answer. So, what does a failing PCV valve, the positive crankcase ventilation valve, actually look like and feel like in a Toyota? Let me be specific, because vague symptoms are how misdiagnoses happen. You may notice a rough idle at operating temperature, particularly a rhythmic shudder between 600 and 900 RPM. Oil leaks can appear at the valve cover gasket, the rear main seal, or the oil pan gasket without any obvious history of seal damage. Increased oil consumption with no visible external leak happens because oil is being pulled into the intake as vapor and burned. A whistling or hissing sound from the valve cover area that changes with engine RPM is common. You might see black or dark gray smoke on cold startup that clears after a minute or two. A slight smell of oil burning from the engine bay without a visible leak is another clue. Erratic fuel trims on a scan tool, particularly lean conditions at idle that do not fully resolve with throttle, are often related. And perhaps most telling, a rough idle that worsens after a long highway drive when crankcase pressure has had time to build. Any one of these symptoms alone might point in a dozen directions. 2 or 3 of them together in a Toyota with more than 80,000 miles should make the PCV valve the first thing you check, not the last. Testing the PCV valve takes 60 seconds. With the engine warm and idling, pull the valve out of its port. If it rattles when shaken, there is likely still some function left, though it may be restricted. If it does not rattle, it is stuck and needs to be replaced immediately. You can also cover the opening with your thumb while it is disconnected. On a healthy system, you should feel a gentle vacuum pulling against your thumb. If you feel no vacuum, or if you feel pressure pushing outward instead, the system is compromised. This test is not perfect and does not catch every failure mode, but it will catch the most common ones in about a minute with no tools. Replacement on most Toyota 4-cylinder engines involves removing the valve from the valve cover, disconnecting the hose, and pressing the new one in. That is the entire job on many applications. On the V6 engines found in the Tacoma, Highlander, and older 4Runner, the location varies, but the job rarely exceeds 20 minutes for someone who knows where to look. OEM Toyota PCV valves from the dealer typically run $15 to $25. Parts store alternatives from Gates or Standard Motor products are generally reliable and cost $8 to $14. Aftermarket quality matters more here than on some components, because a cheap valve that sticks prematurely puts you right back where you started. There is one additional detail worth understanding, and this separates drivers who fix problems from drivers who fix symptoms. The PCV hoses are part of the system. If the valve has been failing for a long time, the hoses that connect it to the intake manifold and valve cover will often be coated internally with oil varnish, cracked from heat cycles, or partially collapsed. Replacing the valve without inspecting the hoses is like clearing a clogged pipe but leaving a partially blocked section downstream. On Toyota engines with 120,000 miles or more, if the PCV valve is being replaced for the first time, the hoses should be inspected carefully and replaced if there is any cracking, oil saturation, or collapse. The cost is usually another $10 to $30 in parts depending on the application. The Camry that came into my shop that Tuesday walked out with a new PCV valve and 1 replacement hose. Total parts cost was $18.47. The idle was steady before the car left the lot. The rough shudder at red lights was gone. The second shop had quoted him $560 for spark plugs, coils, and a throttle body cleaning. The first had been leaning toward injector service. Neither had suggested the PCV valve. He had driven the car with this problem for 4 months. He had spent $180 in diagnostic fees across 2 visits. He had burned more fuel than he should have, and every mile of that was on a part that costs less than a fast food lunch. This is why understanding how your engine actually works matters more than trusting any single repair estimate. Not because mechanics are dishonest, most are not, but because the incentives in this industry do not reward leading with the simplest, cheapest answer. They reward thoroughness that generates billable hours. The driver who understands what the PCV system does, how it fails, and what symptoms it creates will never pay $560 to fix a $12 problem. That knowledge is worth more than any extended warranty. Before you authorize your next repair for rough idle, oil leaks, excessive oil consumption, or erratic fuel trims on a Toyota or any other vehicle, Ask one question. When was the PCV valve last inspected? If nobody has a good answer, you have yours. Start there. The fix might take 5 minutes and cost less than a gallon of gas. The relief of watching every symptom disappear after an $18 repair is something no estimate can replicate. If this changed how you look at maintenance, hit like so more drivers see it before they get an estimate that starts with 4 digits. Subscribe if you want more of this, the real causes behind expensive repairs, the parts nobody mentions until it is too late, and the knowledge that puts you in control instead of at the mercy of a clipboard. Drop a comment if you have ever fixed something serious with a part that cost less than $20. Those stories are the ones this channel exists to tell. Because the most expensive car problem is not the mechanical failure. It is never knowing to look for the $12 part first.